At the University of Notre Dame, Australia. I'd like to warmly welcome you to the university and to this lecture in honour of Father Peter Slattery. I also thank you at this time for turning off or silencing your mobile phones. This lecture is in honour of Father Peter Slattery. Father Peter was a Carmelite priest and a Doctor of Education, well known for his ministry in Western Australia and Victoria. In Victoria, he served as a lecturer in religious education at Yarra Theological Union. He was an examiner in religious education for the Melbourne College of Divinity. In Western Australia, he served as a consultant and a secondary school's religious education coordinator for the Catholic Education Office. He also served as a part-time lecturer for the Catholic Institute of Western Australia. Father Peter was a great supporter of the University of Notre Dame. From 1990, he served as the university's Deputy Director of Development and helped lay the foundation for the university that Notre Dame is today. As a Carmelite priest, Father Peter was a scholar of his tradition and spirituality. In 1990, he published the book, The Springs of Carmel, an exposition of Carmelite spirituality. In 1994, he published St. John of the Cross, a spirituality of substance. Father Peter died in 1995. After his death, his father, Jack Slattery, endowed this lecture as a personal way of honouring him. Tonight, we have the honour of hosting Dr Rod Pattenden and Dr Rachel Cohen, who have come to Perth as judges for the Mandorla Art Award and the Mandorla Youth Award. To introduce them and this evening's presentation, I'd like to hand over to Dr Angela McCarthy, lecturer in theology at the University of Notre Dame and chairperson of the Mandorla Art Award. Dr McCarthy.
Thank you very much, Professor Ogilvie. And good evening to you all. It's indeed very gratifying to see so many of you who are willing to come out on a winter's night. It was a very pleasurable day, but quite a cold night. I'd like to welcome Reverend Ron Larkin, who is one of the patrons of Mandorla, and his wife, Reverend Viv Larkin. Our other patrons are Archbishop Hurt and Archbishop Costello, supported by all three of their denominations. One of our other sponsors is the Benedictine community of New Norcia, and I understand Don Chris Power, thank you Don Chris, is here this evening from New Norcia. As this award is acquisitive, our collection of artworks since 1985 have been housed and exhibited at the New Norcia Gallery. We also thank Cardinal George Pell, who is a supporter of the Mandorla Art Award through the Archdiocese of Sydney, and also St Joseph's Parish Subiaco is one of our sponsors. The Mandorla Art Award was established in 1985 as an effort to continue the patronage of Christian art so that contemporary artists could be drawn into expressing biblical themes. The effort's been rewarded with many notable artworks that are now in our collection in New Norcia and currently on exhibition in New Norcia if any one of you would like a lovely drive in the country. Our award has always had that biblical connection, and the theme this year is from Galatians 4, verse 4. And in the fullness of time, God sent his only Son, born of a woman, born under the law. It's proved to be a challenging theme, and we will name the winner on Friday night in Perth Town Hall, and I encourage you all to view the award if you can, as it will be open in the Perth Town Hall until Sunday, August 19th. Our lecturers tonight, Dr Rachel Cohen and Dr Rod Pattenden, are both judges for our award, and that is why they've arrived in Western Australia today, fresh off the plane. So the procedure for this evening is that both Rachel and Rod will address us on their particular aspect of religious art. Rachel will address us on religious art and the soul, and Rod on religious art and the body. Following that, we will be open for questions and a conversation about religious art, because it certainly is an area of academia and it's an area of contemporary discussion that is well worthwhile. So, our first speaker, Dr Rod Pattenden, is a minister of the Uniting Church in Australia and has just taken up a role as minister of the Adamstown Parish Community in Newcastle, and he has a particular brief to set up a visual performing arts program there. Rod is an artist, an art historian, and educational facilitator interested in this particular connection between spirituality and the arts. He's written and lectured widely on these aspects of the arts and creativity in Australia and overseas. He was coordinator of the Institute of Theology of the Arts and is currently chairperson of the Blake Prize for Religious Art, as well as co-creative director of Interplay Australia, which is an organisation that offers a creative and affirming approach to being human, using gentle movement, voice, story and playfulness. He has particular strengths in the areas of visual arts, performance skills, movement and exploring the processes of creativity. His PhD was focused on contemporary art and spirituality. As an artist, he's been involved in a wide variety of community projects and management roles, artist in residence and creative facilitation of events. He's initiated a number of community arts projects that have enhanced the community building and healthy cultural diversity, which is so well needed in our Australian contemporary society. He's written widely on the arts, contributing to key publications on the work of a number of Australian leading artists, as well as developing a number of innovative exhibitions and installation projects, including liturgical art within sacred space. He's also been involved in the wider Asian community in the publication about arts and Christianity. So, we welcome you, Rod, to come and speak to us on religious art and the body.
Thanks, Angela, for that warm welcome. Very, very grateful to be here, and we were having dinner just before we arrived here this evening. Rachel and I, members of the committee, and Rachel and I expressed a great deal of anticipation and excitement to getting there on Friday and have a look at the 65 finalists for this year's prize. We can already anticipate we've got into those questions about why do artists do what they do? How do they ever come up with this conclusion to the task of interpreting or illustrating or dealing with the passage chosen for them? Artists are really annoying, inspirational, wonderful voices. It really affirms the role of the arts, but it leaves us with lots of questions. And as chair of the Blake Prize, it also, I think, brings controversy. So I think I'm going to get my hands dirty with the first half of the lecture about body, which is the most inspirational or controversial part, and then Rachel's wonderful voice will illuminate the soul connection, and I'll leave it to her to bring it all beautifully together. So that's our task tonight. My task is to talk a little bit about the connection with religious art and the body. The things that we can say about that in the Christian tradition is that this is where it becomes most controversial or most comforting. Christianity is distinctive in its affirmation of the life of the body. It's in the body we experience pain and ecstasy and the delight of being human. So it's an interesting area because the arts are also about enfleshment and incarnation. It's through the arts, whether it's dance or literature or music or the tickling of the ear, the movement of our bodies, and the seeing with our eyes, that we actually celebrate our own receptivity as incarnational beings. And that's an area I want to talk about when we get the images up and running. And several years ago, as chair of the Blake Prize, we had a very large controversy. This is a great disappointment to somebody who's a great advocate, if not an evangelist, a person who's involved as a curator and chair of the Blake Prize. It's kind of an evangelistic thing. As an artist, I eventually found myself at art school and then went into the ministry. It's a very unusual job trajectory. Most ministers or priests are usually teachers or accountants. much more solid folk. And it was certainly part of my hope that the arts would become more part of the life of the church as we reimagine what our faith is in this particular moment in history. But we live in an environment where images are much more part of the everyday way we negotiate our lives in a postmodern situation. Young people use images all the time to negotiate their commitments. They shop for a life, as it were, for who they want to be. It's quite a different intellectual and philosophical environment. And images become much more important in that kind of environment. In 2008, I was awoken by journalists at 6 o'clock in the morning after the opening of the Blake Prize with this controversy on the front page of the Daily Telegraph. Now, the Daily Telegraph in Sydney usually has sport on the front page, so it's very unusual that they've taken an interest in artwork. But the photographer from the Daily Telegraph had spied several works up on the wall that he thought would make a great front page story, and without little trouble, this controversy began to unfold on this day. A very small statue that an artist had obviously got from a second-hand store and put on her face, Mary, a burqa, a Muslim face covering. Is this contravening codes of conduct? Well, according to the Daily Telegraph and the people they interviewed, including Prime Minister Howard, who was otherwise asleep at 3 o'clock in the morning, I don't know how they got a comment that they did. So he was deeply offended on behalf of good church folk of Australia. And another image of Osama bin Laden and the face of Jesus Christ in the one picture. Now, these works are contemporary art. They're an attempt to address questions of art and media. But what struck me was the way in which the media then began to unfold the story around tensions between Christians and Muslims in Sydney in particular. And by 11 o'clock in the morning, I had a journalist asking me on camera, and what do you think about the death threats to the artists, Reverend Pattenden? And I stopped the interview with Channel 9, so you don't usually do this, and we got the artist on the phone, and there were no death threats whatsoever. But there is an air that we breathe these days about interreligious difference or dialogue, or just plain hatred, which I think informs our discussion of what is religious art. We don't live in a culture where we live within our own particular tradition. We have to traffic and understand difference at every step. And here's a picture of the two works, which really just sat quietly in the corner and didn't draw attention to themselves, except that they became a front page story. Several phone calls later, I had members of the public ringing me, deeply offended and upset about what had happened. And I had to deal with those phone calls respectfully and try to understand what the nature of the offence was. These artists have clearly not intended to offend anyone, but were wanting to make some comment about issues of contemporary concern. One woman said to me, when I saw that on the front page of the Daily Telegraph, it was as if my stomach had been punched. It's as if the artwork had somehow reached out to her and punched her in the stomach. So deeply offended was she. Now, as an art historian, you kind of note that sort of thing with some concern. Do images have the capacity to deeply embroil our guts? Do they, in fact, turn us inside out? There is, in fact, a lot of evidence to say that images somehow are part of the archaeology of our belief. They lie somewhere down deep in our bellies. They tell us who we are as bodies, as people in a tradition, and something about where we're headed. So if this anecdote is true, images are not just intellectual things, particularly religious ones. They lie deep within our skin. The work that did win the Blake Prize that year is this wonderful painting by Shirley Purdy, which is a 12 Stations of the Cross. And she came to the gallery and flew down from the north part of Western Australia. And in the gallery, there's a photograph of her, and she began to recount the story of how this community in Warman sing these songs as part of their liturgy. And I asked her, what does her community know about suffering and about the story of Jesus that makes this particularly relevant to her community. And she began to have tears roll down her eyes as she told us about the story of the massacre at Mistake Creek, which happened in the 1930s, where a significant number of her forebears were murdered by mistake by the local station owner. It's a very well-known story in the northwest Kimberley area. But for this woman in her 60s, it was a story that is still present, where she's connecting the story of Jesus Christ and the suffering one with the contemporary experience of her own history. And it reminded me as she cried that religious images are deeply buried in our bodies. They're part of fundamentally who we are, and sometimes it's through art they are in fact examined and come to the fore. This is a lithograph she's done of the tree where the bodies were buried of the 20, 30 folk, her grandparents' age. It's a great boab tree, and it's somehow been transformed by two fingers as she's counting out the numbers of her parents, grandparents' age who passed away. It's kind of very kind of creepy. You sort of get that feeling up the back of your spine of a memorial image about death and suffering. So images are everywhere. We swim in a sea of images, and they train who we are as bodies, how we think, how we understand discipline, about how we run the race of life and where we're headed. One artist that you would probably know is John Coburn. He has won the prize here, and he's hopefully going to see his work tomorrow as I go up to New Norcia. He's an artist I hope that you will be familiar with. He, I think, is one of our great priestly artists. He's one who takes our experience as a body into an experience of like an icon. He reminds us that life is ordered, that it has a sense to it, a sensuality and an intelligence. He very much fulfills, I think, the role of the priest. Everything is okay. I think that's what priests are supposed to do, aren't they? Every time they conduct a liturgy, everything's fine. Everything's okay. There is an order to life underlying all this chaos. And in his work, I think he exhibits a wonderful connection to the Australian landscape. He grew up in the north part of Queensland, and he has a very rich, evocative use of the language of birds and trees and the air being filled